Is KMMU.org. This is the Utah. I wish I could start over. It is Main Street Media, Utah. I tend to go on automatic sometimes and do my history, so I apologize to everyone. KMMU.org, and we are on Twitter, X, and we are on YouTube and Instagram. So we're really, really excited to have you here. This is the Liberty Mom Show. Liberty Moms are the original Secretaries of Defense. We are the real defenders of the home front. And I'm your host, Dalane England, and I have an amazing Liberty dad that is our guest today. Austin Hepworth, and he's absolutely amazing. And I'm just so impressed. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. You'll be able to figure out how brilliant he is when he starts talking. But he is an attorney. He's licensed both in Utah and California. And he is running for Utah Attorney General. And he is running on the as an independent candidate, not with either one of the big parties. He has worked in many areas of law, which you'll be able to tell after you hear what he has to say. He's worked in constitutional, business, tax, estate planning, civil litigation. But the thing that I love about Austin is that he has such a deep appreciation and love for America and the principles of our Constitution and our amazing country. And he has authored legal briefs in every level of federal courts and Utah courts, and has drafted and helped pass a variety of laws in the state of Utah, which is where I first met Austin and got to know him. He graduated summa cum laude and first in his law school and undergraduate class, and he graduated as the valedictorian of his high school. He was homeschooled from grades 3 through 9th. He served a mission in Taiwan for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and he learned Mandarin Chinese. Can you still speak it, Austin?
I have a poor accent, but I can still understand quite a bit of it.
And he currently has his own law firm, and he helps other people and believes in the work to keep America strong and America a land of liberty. And he very much does that. Plus, I think I must add in the most important part of your resume or your bio, and that is that you're a father of, and if I remember correctly, which I probably don't, you have 8 children.
That's right.
Okay, so I got something right. He has 8 children and he looks like he's 21. That's pretty amazing. But he and his wife both look like teenagers, and they even have teenagers. So it's hard when they have the family picture. You can't tell where the parents are. But as I said, Austin is quite brilliant, and I'm very excited to have him on today because we have a lot of really important issues to discuss, and they're important things that people need to take into consideration and look at. And we want to be educated because so often we get the ballots, we don't know, we're trying to read it, trying to guess, we don't understand. And what I do want to say is that Attorney General, in my personal, not at all humble opinion, the Attorney General's office is one of the most important offices in our entire state. And the decisions and the actions of the AG impact our culture. They impact everyday people's everyday lives. It's such an important, who we have there matters so much. It's such an important office. And we need someone who's truly founded and grounded in the Constitution and who truly understands it and who has some legal expertise. And as you can tell, Austin definitely has legal expertise and he has a great understanding of the Constitution. So, Austin, first of all, everybody wants to know, why did you decide to run for AG?
Yeah, so first, Dalane, thanks for having me on. It's always good to be here. Certainly love Liberty Moms around the state. It is something that we have a lot of moms who do some amazing things, and it's really neat to see. And so big shout out and thanks to those moms who stand up and get so much done.
I love it. I agree.
And yeah, there's a lot that I see take place with that. On the side of running, it goes back to what you had mentioned. You said that you feel the AG's office impacts our everyday life and culture. And in my experience, it's really hard for people to see or understand how. even the law feels like something that you can read its words on a piece of paper, but it's hard to visualize the impact it has on us. So I want to give an example, hopefully, that will appeal to, I think most people have some experience with this. There will be some people that aren't sports people, so forgive me if you're not. But the analogy is, sports are amazing. People love to watch them for entertainment. It's incredible to see the neat things that humans can do and achieve. They do just some incredible things in sporting events. We watch the Olympics, we do these other things. But every single sport, in order to be amazing, has to have a very strong body of independent referees that enforce the rules. And so to give an example of what things look like on both sides, if you have the NBA playoffs, and let's say the Lakers are playing the Jazz, and if the Lakers get to choose the referees, many people know how that goes. They've seen games where it appears the refs are calling things. It appears the refs are biased. And you can watch, if the Lakers pick the referees, they're not going to get called for fouls or traveling or different things. And the Jazz will get called for everything. And when that happens, one of the important things to understand about the culture created by law and by, I believe, the Attorney General, the prosecutors, the others we have in place, when the referees are biased, when they're conflicted, when they're not calling things fairly and equally and just enforcing the rules of the game, it actually creates intense anger among those that are watching or participating. And we ask right now, we often say, why are American politics so angry? Why are people so upset? We know that there's been differing opinions for all of America's history. That's one of the things that liberty does. We don't agree on things. That's like having two sports teams both trying to win a game. But you can go to the Super Bowl and have an amazing experience, even if your team loses. It's sad, it's disappointing. But you're not there going, this is the last Super Bowl ever. There'll never be another one. We don't have these types of conversations.
Right.
And I think that again, it's because they work so hard in sports to have very strong independent referees that will just call the shots and the rules as they fall. Now, again, is every game perfect? No, I'm not pretending like it works out perfectly every time. But overall, the integrity of the sports and the system depends upon these independent refs. So if you think about that in the context of politics, one of the things that's happening right now in America, and there's an increasing push for it from both sides. This is a call from both sides of the political spectrum. And they are saying, hey, prosecutors, don't enforce laws that we disagree with. What's happening with that is we're politicalizing the law. We're politicalizing the referees. We're making them biased. We're seeking to elect people who are biased.
Mm-hmm.
When we do that, we are setting the stage for the anger to come in when people know the law is not being fairly or equally enforced. We may not always agree with the law. There are bad laws. I'm not pretending like all laws are great. It's the same in sports. There's some just wild rules sometimes, and you just go, why is that here? But at the end of the day, when you have certainty about what's supposed to happen and they're just equally and fairly enforced, the level of anger goes down and society can function together. And so I see the politicalization of our prosecutors, our AGs, the increasing politicalization of it as being directly correlated with and connected to the level of anger in America. And I believe that if we continue to elect a Republican to govern the Republicans and we demand more political or party preference with it, the level of anger will grow. Because the law, the whole basis of America is we weren't supposed to have kings, we weren't supposed to have monarchs. Mm-hmm. And to accomplish that, we had to have a law that just was enforced and applied to everybody. If there was anyone that ever came above the law for any reason, it starts to break down the whole system and foundation of the Constitution in America. And so it's fascinating in this view of, again, where does anger come from? I'm not pretending like there's no other causes of anger. Fans can obviously be angry if they lose. That happens sometimes. But overall, I think it's a huge contributing factor. And when Trump had his trial and his appeal to the Supreme Court about immunity, there was a big discussion in America of should anyone be above the law or not. And it was fascinating to me because the discussion didn't include the fact that prosecutors have absolute immunity, meaning that they are above the law in a sense. They can choose who to prosecute, and they can choose to not prosecute. They can even prosecute someone they know is innocent. Let's call it malicious prosecution, and there's still no liability or anything that comes to them. Utah law expressly states that you can't sue them for malicious prosecution. And the Supreme Court's chosen, they've said that they feel prosecutors need absolute immunity to do their job functions and things. But what that leads to then is if prosecutors choose not to prosecute certain people, government officials or corporations or different things that they're friends with or that support them, then suddenly people, even if they're not fully aware of everything that's happening, they start to realize at some point there's favorites being played. Things aren't being applied equally. They can tell that something's off. And it's the same as when the refs start calling things. Even if you don't understand all the rules of the game, you just go, this feels like this one team's getting way more calls than the other. And it starts to create anger. And it starts to impact our culture in so many ways. And it breaks down trust between people. It breaks down the ability of people to feel like the law, they can turn to the law for help. And if you can't turn to the law for help in America, then people resort to feeling like they need to be violent. The law is what keeps society from being violent. To have this answerable condition, it's like a sporting event. If the refs aren't calling anything in sports, it's going to turn violent. People will start punching each other, doing things. They'll get angry because there's no referee to enforce things in I'm talking a high stakes sporting event. And it's the enforcement of the rules that keeps that connected and grounded. And so when we talk about running for Attorney General, it's an office I feel is supposed to be a check and balance. And when we elect a Republican to police the Republicans, it creates conflicts. It's inevitable. I don't believe you can elect people to that position without there being conflicts and issues that are raised, because the party helps them get there. All their donors, it's their people. They're going to jeopardize the name of the party, all these other things if they prosecute someone. And there's so many natural conflicts that arise to just any human that I don't believe you can expect them to go through that fairly. Just like a member of the team isn't going to be a fair ref. It's just almost impossible.
Exactly. Even the person that has a lot of integrity, it's very difficult, and their actions will be questioned by both sides, because it's very hard to act like you're neutral when you're on a specific team. And
Correct.
that doesn't just play out in the AG's office, but it also plays out in the lieutenant governor's office, whose only job is to be over elections. And
Correct.
so that brings up another issue that we can talk about a little bit later, is like you're saying, you can't have someone that's on the Republican team over elections of both Republicans and Democrats and over themselves and think that there's not going to be some questions asked and some issues with some integrity.
Correct.
Even potentially there, even with people of the greatest integrity and honor.
Yep. And it's just the human condition that
Yes.
when you have the potential to have something to gain, it creates a perception of unfairness, which then creates the anger. So no matter how good that teammate is that you selected to be the referee, it's still at the point there's something questionable called, then there's that instant assignment of intent or bias with it. And so again, in sports, it's fascinating to look to these other places, because in sports they know this, so the refs are independent, and yet we don't demand the same for politics. For example, the state auditor, we say, oh yeah, we can elect a Republican to audit Republicans. And they say, in what other realm of humanity is that even allowed?
Can you
We don't
imagine
allow it.
business? I mean, I've had business, a couple of them. Can you imagine, like, oh yeah, we're just going to audit ourselves. We're going to audit ourselves and just trust us. Everything will be fine. I mean, it just doesn't happen in the real world. It doesn't happen anywhere.
No, anywhere except politics. And then we
Politics,
sit here.
political and in education, because again, there's no oversight or accountability in the education system.
Yeah, sadly to me, at least in my mind, I always equate education and politics together, unfortunately.
Of course, and it is, because education, public education is government. It is
Yep.
government, schools, government run. But I just, for those who are not necessarily thinking in that realm, I just wanted to add that in, make it specific. But you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and again, like you say, though, education can include more than just public government. But yes, at least the public education side, it's the courts consider it government run, that type of thing. So yeah, to me, it falls under that. Even some of the medical things like, and this was interesting to me. I didn't realize this before I was testifying on a bill up at the legislature, but the University of Utah Hospital is considered government run as well, and it makes sense, once I thought it through. But I had never connected a hospital to government run necessarily,
because it's
just in my mind.
Government. It's owned by the government, owned by the state, run by the state. It's
Yeah.
a government hospital.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, they take public-private funds. They take money from citizens or others as well, but it is a government hospital.
Yeah, and one of the random facts to know with the AG's office will collect amounts owing to the University of Utah Hospital. So you get treated differently in collections when you go there than if you go to another hospital.
All right, say that again, because I want to be sure everyone understands exactly what you just said.
So the AG's office will collect funds that are owed to the University of Utah Hospital. So as a citizen, you could have the AG's office coming after you for unpaid medical bills. But you don't have that if you go to IHC. You'd have a normal attorney, a normal debt collector.
That is very fascinating. Yeah, because they represent the state.
Yeah.
And the state's funds and the state's interests.
Yeah. So, and just in my experience, debt collection workouts for people are different if they've been at the University of Utah Hospital than if they've been at other hospitals. And it's just been one of those factors again that feels curious to me in the sense of, is this fair? Is this appropriate? Because again, I'm not pretending that all laws are fair or appropriate. Because I should be fair to say there are two sources of things that can create intense anger in sports. One is if the referees aren't fair, but another is if the laws are just so unjust or the rules are just so unfair. That can make people upset too, of just stupid rules. And our society does have some bad laws that we need to change. And they are unfair and they favor certain people. Just as an example, I say no matter how much you like hockey, I don't know why it's fair even remotely that Salt Lake City has voted to funnel sales tax funds directly to a billionaire. To me, it's incredibly unfair. It's incredibly inappropriate. And it's not the function of government. And if we start doing things like that, the level of anger in society is going to rise so much because, the billionaires get their handouts and their loans and taxpayer funded and all these things. And a lot of people say, well, I'd rather use my tax funds on something like hockey than other things they're spending it on. And I say, well, I get that. Like we don't spend our funds on appropriate things all the time, but rather than just saying, well, it's better than funding something else I disagree with, I say, no, we need to really just say, hey, government, let's come back to our lane. Our job is not to finance sports stadiums. Let's just pull out of this. And so to me, the AG should both enforce the rules as they stand, but the bad ones that also are unfair and create issues, I believe the AG should be very vocal about and shine a light on the laws and the winners and losers associated with them to say, look, why is this appropriate that, a private individual is getting so much benefit from a law when it should be more equally applied?
Private business is a private business because it's not about liking hockey or not liking hockey. It's not about that. It's about the government picking one business. The government pays for the infrastructure, and then one owner or a business, it doesn't matter if it's owned by one person or a small group of people, but a business then receives the benefits of the proceeds. They receive the revenues from the business that the people, it would be different if the people paid for it and then the people got the revenues from it.
I agree.
If we all paid for the hockey arena and the hockey team and we paid for it, and then the people all got the proceeds, which again isn't the proper role of government, but at least you could say we're paying for it, then we get the revenues from it. But what's happening is the people are going to pay for the infrastructure, and then this company, this one person that owns the company, is going to get all of the benefits from that. Well, not all of them, but they're going to get the proceeds, the revenues from it. Because of course, their argument is that other businesses, restaurants, hotels are going to benefit from it. Yeah. And that, I'm not saying that's not true. I'm just saying it's not the role of the government to pay for the infrastructure of one specific business. They're certainly not paying for my infrastructure of my business. And that's okay with me because I don't want them to.
Yeah. And it's just so it's to point out when we talk about anger and frustration in politics in our country, I believe they're the two large sources. One is when the law is manifestly unjust and just unfair. Again, going back to the Lakers versus Jazz, can you imagine a rule in sports that said, we'll just let LeBron James or Shaq, good old Shaq from a while ago, they can take 5 steps, but everyone else is stuck to 2.
Mm-hmm. Right.
People would be so angry about it if it were put on paper. And we're doing that with these billionaires. We're saying, hey, billionaire, you can do something that nobody else here can. Good job, because for whatever reason you got through. Now, again, maybe the city officials had the purest of intentions and there was no backroom deals. They just want the city to be nice. But from the outside perspective, it immediately, in everyone's mind, they say there's no way. City officials are getting something, accusations start flying, and then the city officials are going, no, we're just trying to do what's best for the city. But when there's so much perceived bias and perceived issues with that type of vote, it's very difficult for someone to believe it was just a pure thing. Again, if the NBA said, yeah, LeBron James can take 5 steps, but nobody else can, why would anyone believe there was just a pure motive to that? It just is like, well, pure motives would be equal to everyone, wouldn't they? You're a government official. Why isn't this benefit going everywhere? And that's where I think we're going wrong. And so again, on the AG side and law touching so many things, law touches everything we do, even the fact that you have a house with a fence and you can come home and people don't come on your property. Maybe you get a salesman at the door, but people aren't wandering around your backyard. Why? It's because we have laws. We have this rule of law in place. And we, for the most part, feel pretty safe in our homes. Yeah, there's some criminals sometimes and different things. You drive on the roads, you see our whole road system, you see all the houses, you see everything. And every one of those is a manifestation of a law that exists, that's done something, good or bad. And we often say, a lot of people say, hey, your city officials will impact your life far more than your federal officials. I say, well, maybe, but we may see the impact of the city official more readily. But I live right next to I-15 and I-215. Those are federal roads. That was a federal decision to come in and take people's property and put roads on through. And there's so many federal laws that apply. Every time I go to the gas pump, I'm paying a whole bunch of money extra for gas and federal taxes and things. And these are things that, again, am I saying I shouldn't pay for roads? No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the federal government does do a lot that impacts our lives on a daily basis. They have so many laws, even just healthcare, the whole medical health system. Every time you interact with a doctor, it's almost all federal regulation.
Now you're going to make me mad, Austin, bringing that up, because that pushes my button for sure.
But it's just to say that overall, I'm not saying that city officials don't have an impact. They have a huge impact. I'm just saying that overall, the law itself has an impact, whether it's at the federal level, state level, city level. Everything that we do and interact with is governed by something. And just as an example, too, even on something that we don't think about, the impacts of the law, but the federal level, and most of the states have adopted this as well. But at the federal level, they say that a company is not allowed to take money as, to sell stock to someone. So a private company that's not publicly traded, they can't sell stock to someone that doesn't qualify as an accredited investor. And an accredited investor means you have to have a certain amount of income each year or a certain level of assets that you're holding. And it's basically defined as someone that's pretty rich. You're in the upper ranks of riches in society to be an accredited investor. And they say, the law says, the federal law says, well, we want to prevent poor people from investing in a business and losing all their money and being on welfare. But what it does is, if they really wanted to do that, they could say something in the law like, no one can invest more than 10% of their income into a business. But what happens right now is we just ban poor people at the federal level. We ban poor people from investing in a business. Well, how are they ever going to get ahead if they can't live the American dream and invest in a business? That's how we do it in America. And the rich, we always go, why are the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer? And I say, well, they talk about this widening gap. Well, we have laws that are directly impacting poor people. There's a winner and a loser chosen. And the poor people can't put money into a business and watch it grow 100 times. That would be amazing if you put $200 into a business as a poor person and watch it grow 100 times, have it come back at $20,000.
That used to happen. It used to happen.
It used to happen.
And that is the American dream. That, the beauty of America was that you always had to take a risk. To be successful was a risk, and you could fail. But that's the only way it works. It doesn't work if there's no way to fail. You can only go up. And then, like you say, it's only available to people that are already successful. The American dream is, it doesn't matter where you come from, how poor you are, or what your background and history is. You have the opportunity to go for it and be successful. But it all comes at a risk.
Yep. And again, the point of this is more just to say, I believe the AG should be actively shining the light on these laws and calling it out to say, here's the winners and losers. Do you really want to live under this regime, America, where the poor people are banned from investing in a private business? Why? And there's so many examples. Healthcare, we could go on forever about the laws that are destroying healthcare. The American healthcare system is broke because of the laws that exist.
Yes.
There are so many laws that are destroying the healthcare system. And if we want to improve healthcare, we just need to pull back some of these laws and get back to a place of basic economic principles of, you know what? A hospital should have to tell you how much something's going to cost before they charge it to you.
Absolutely.
Such a basic principle.
Basic principle that which we expect in every other aspect of life. You got to tell me so I can decide if I want to do it or not. I need to know.
Yep.
And then the government telling the hospitals or doctors that they have to provide free care to certain people, where people are pretty darn generous, as we can see. People are very generous, and we have nonprofits that will do that. But then when the government comes in, then what does it do to healthcare prices? Somebody's got to pay for it. Everyone ends up paying more.
Yeah, and it's not the point of this discussion today, so I won't continue to go on healthcare. But yes, there's an amazing number of things that the law breaks in healthcare and radically changes the pricing, radically changes access. And to give an example of what the law does, there's an interesting, I don't know if it's a YouTube site or what it is, but there's a site that talks about unintended consequences of the law, where whenever you come in and try and regulate a human with a law, you interpose a law there are consequences for good or bad. And quite often, the law will have the exact opposite effect of what you're trying to do with it.
Right.
And so one of the unintended consequences that they'll talk about is they shared, I don't remember what country it was. There's a country somewhere in Central or South America, I think, that wanted to encourage planting more trees. They were struggling with deforestation issues. And so they passed a law and said, hey, we're going to give a company money for every tree it plants. Because the theory is if you give someone money, then they want to do it.
Right.
And so these companies would go plant trees to get money. But what they started finding out a little bit into this law is that companies that had land with a lot of existing trees cut all their trees down and then planted new ones so they could get paid the money. Complete opposite effect of what they were trying to do. No one thought about it, but my belief is when law leaves its proper sphere or scope, it starts to have some very unintended consequences. Things start to backfire. Once we violate
the principle, it's very hard to get things set back properly again.
Yeah, and it's even to say once we violate the principle of, I view law, the role of law is providing a proper balance to say we have to pull ourselves out of anarchy, but we have to keep ourselves from tyranny.
Exactly.
takes
That's
personal responsibility to keep
balance.
us from tyranny.
Mm-hmm.
And when the law goes off balance on either side, there's unintended consequences of that. And so socialist laws that try and encourage behavior through redistribution of wealth, they're going to have very crazy impacts that come. Healthcare has become very socialist in nature, the way the laws are, and there's intensely, we can call them unintentional, meaning I don't think the good-hearted people that voted for the law intended for that to happen. Someone probably understood what would happen, is my bet. But they passed these laws trying to give more access, protect more consumers. Oh, we're going to protect the poor people and not let them invest in a company. Well, your consequence of that is you're going to keep them poor. They don't have a way to move up now. And healthcare, we're going to make healthcare more affordable. Well, you actually just made it more expensive with these laws you put in place.
100%.
And this is what happens when we step in and try and control. It's another example would be, let's say a law came out and said it's illegal to hate. What's it going to do? Is it going to reduce the level of hate or increase the level of hate? That law, if you try and come in and force a person to not hate, it will produce more hate.
It will cause people to hate and resentment. And anything you focus on is what you get. Whatever you put energy on and focus on is what you get. So if you're going to do a law like that, you want to pass a law that people have to love. At least you're putting the focus on something that you want.
But even then, it's still off balance to me. It's in the realm of human. You can't regulate the human heart.
You can't force people to love. You can't. But at least if you talked about love instead of hate, you get more love. Okay, so Austin, one of the issues that I think is really important in our society right now, not just in Utah, but very much it's been on the forefront of Utah. And as an educator, as a mother and a grandmother, this is a really important issue for me. And that is, I think people are maybe a little ignorant to, or would be surprised to find how much pornography is in our school libraries. And it is rampant and it is abundant. And I just want to put a plug for ratedbooks.org has a list of the books that are there. And there's this huge process that we have to go through in order to remove the books. But as the Attorney General, if you're Attorney General, what do you think you can do and what would you do regarding the really violent and just disgusting and gross pornography that is in our public school libraries?
Yeah, it's been interesting to me to look at Utah law on pornography. I actually think there are some pretty strong laws in place currently that could be enforced by the AG's office, including one that says that it is a crime for an adult to distribute pornography to a minor.
Yes.
So I can't hand a minor a pornographic magazine or video or something. That's illegal.
It's illegal. We can't read it on the radio show. We can't put it on TV. The news, when they go to report it, they go, no, you can't read it. It's against the law to even put it out there. And if you try to read it at a school board meeting, they will shut you down because, well, they don't really want anybody to know, but it's so vulgar. They don't want it presented in a school board meeting.
Yeah, and again, the law says you can't distribute this to a minor.
Right.
And so I look at that and I say, why are we giving librarians, again, it's this thing of unequal enforcement. Why are we giving librarians a free pass to say, well, you can just put pornography in a library that's intended for minors? That makes no sense to me. And I think that we should absolutely say, hey, if you're a librarian, if you're anyone, we have this standard in Utah that you can't distribute pornography to minors. So librarians, you tell me, and again, I don't believe that you have to come in as an AG and just suddenly just criminally charge 50 people and do all these things. Send them a letter and say, hey, this is the law. I'm going to start to enforce it. So what are you doing to keep these things from minors? You can't distribute pornography to minors. And it's fascinating to me to listen to the debate because I have tried very hard to understand why people are so passionate about keeping these books in. There are some groups and people that want them in so badly. And most of it comes to people saying a child that doesn't follow the normal, heterosexual feelings or identity or whatnot needs a place to discover, learn, whatnot. And so I think that one of the bigger debates we're having right now in society that we're not addressing with the pornography in public schools is to say that we're starting to question even, well, what's the role of education? What's the role of a library in a school? Because a library in a school, the space is smaller. There's no way in the world that includes every book.
Right.
And so what is it we're making the selection criteria off of? And I view it similar to the Attorney General's office when you say, currently, what's the AG doing? We don't know. He won't disclose his calendar. The office is kind of a black box. There's not transparency into it. If you ask librarians, well, how are you choosing your books right now? We don't really know. They get these recommendations from a national association, but no one knows, why are those books chosen? What's the criteria? What are we focused on as a state and even selecting our criteria? And yes, you can have a librarian and they can have the purpose of doing that, but there's been no check and balance on these things. There's been no direction. And so if someone says, well, I feel the purpose of public education is to help a child identify all their potential sexual identities, then they're going to push hard for books to be in. And then it goes back to this natural question of, well, what is the purpose of public education? Why are we here? What books should we fill our space with? Back to your point about, do we talk about hate or do we talk about love? There are so many subjects and things we want to fill our children's mind with. Why are we pushing to fill our children's mind with questions of sexuality? Why is that even a part of what we feel is necessary for a child? Now people will say, well, it's because identity and it's a huge part of life. And I get that in a sense, but we are flooding our children with messages of sexuality. Hollywood's replete with it everywhere. They get it in so many discussions, so many things where life is so sexualized that we're now at the place in society where small children are having to ask, do I like boys or girls? And I go, is this really what we want our children growing up in? Believing that their sole purpose in life basically is to be a sexual object, to, be a sexual being? Or do we want to fill their minds with something inspiring to talk about, look, let's be a scientist, let's go to the moon, let's do these different things? And is a child really going to be harmed? Now, some would say yes, they would really be harmed if we didn't talk about sexuality at a young age. And maybe there's some that that's true with. Maybe there's some where it's a deep thing. But at a grand scale, this is where we go back to parents and responsibility to say, well, if your child needs to have these discussions, then have the discussion with your child. Why are we demanding that there's a one-size-fits-all approach to teaching about sexuality? Because in reality, if you've had more than one child as a parent, you've experienced that some children have questions much earlier. Some children are not interested at all until they're much older. Why are we trying to impose a one-size-fits-all on every child? Because that's not what children are. And so to me, the discussion needs to descend into two parts. The AG can only do a piece of it, which is, and this is the way it should be in every situation, the AG should only be able to do a piece. Because when we talk about this balance, this anarchy, tyranny, and liberty in the middle, law has to exist to pull us out of anarchy. That's the AG's job, is to enforce that side. But you have to take personal responsibility on the other side to act in the areas that the law shouldn't. And so if you have, it's just to say the discussion has to always be, well, that's why we have parental rights. So parent, if you're here telling me that your child needs these discussions in these books, guess what? You as a parent, I believe, should have the ability to talk to your child, to share with them the information you feel is necessary for that child. And that's something that you as a parent should be able to do and decide. And the law should say, just like we're not going to distribute alcohol or tobacco to a minor, people can't just distribute pornography to a minor, because the science is so conclusively showing more and more that pornography rewires brains. It's a stimulant. It's addictive. And when we inject this into public schools and children's minds and hearts, it changes them. And I believe very strongly it changes societies and generations in ways that we don't even know yet. We're just starting to tap the research side of really figuring out what it's doing, but we can see it actively rewiring brains. And I think about that and I think, yeah, we should absolutely stand up for our children to say, as a whole, the law says no. As a parent, you should have the ability to talk to your kids about what they need to be, talked to about and have those discussions and, again, give parents their rights there. But I believe Utah law has sufficient avenues in it to keep a lot of pornography out of school. One of the roadblocks that exists, and I do believe this has created some fear to enforcement throughout the state. There are groups ready to sue to claim there's constitutional rights to view these things for children. And there is concern and fear that that could be a holding of a court where they say, oh, kids have a constitutional right to this type of stuff. Because the courts have in the past held that pornography is a protected First Amendment speech. And so part of the enforcement dance has been a high level of concern over not wanting to push the issue into one that becomes a constitutional victory for people that want pornography for everyone.
Right, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so the AG, I think, needs to be aware of that. And I do believe, again, it's why even if I were to get into office, would this be an immediate boom? We're going to just, shut this off immediately. No, it's got to be calculated because the Supreme Court and the courts have had some very bad rulings on pornography. And I believe we need to take time to reframe it away from speech and more towards a stimulant and really put in evidence to show that pornography is a stimulant and we're regulating it like drugs and alcohol and tobacco, as opposed to speech. And I think if we start to prevail on that, we can then make gains. But there are some things that are clearly pornography. And again, on that, I say, we just go back to the law that says nobody can distribute pornography to a minor.
Right.
Let's start there.
Let's start with no one can distribute alcohol. Nobody can give, even in your own home, you can't give your children alcohol in your own home because of the damage it does to their brain for the rest of their life. It literally changes their brain.
Yeah, and one that's developing.
You can't give them drugs. Even if you're the parent, you don't have the right to damage your children. And there has been a really excellent study done. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but I do have it. And they did this research on brains on drugs, brains on addicted to pornography, and a couple of others. And it was fascinating how it literally changes. Being addicted to pornography, it literally changes the physical makeup of the brain, as well as what we do know is when children get addicted as children, their ability to get unaddicted, to get off the addiction, to overcome it, is much more difficult than if you get addicted as an adult. To get off as an adult is more doable because your brain is actually being created and made as a youth, as it's being developed. That addiction becomes a part of it, where if your brain is fully developed before you get started, it is much more doable to get off. So we're really not serving our children by putting this in the schools where they have access. And I just want to say, in defense of the librarians, a lot of these books come bundled. They'll buy a bundle, and so they don't know every book that's in there. And that is an easy fix for librarians, is they need to know what they're buying. They need to stop buying bundles, and they need to be accountable for what books are in there. And I appreciate what you're saying. We need to change the narrative from First Amendment, because I don't know anybody that's wanting to squelch anyone's First Amendment right to speak or to read what they want, but there is something to inappropriateness for children. And we do have a responsibility as a society.
Yes, and I very much believe so. And so, yes, and I would say, let's change the narrative focusing on, well, what's the amazing things to fill our kids' minds with during this time?
Yes.
And it was something my wife had read.
So much great literature out there for them.
There is. There's just incredible stories and incredible things. And this is one that, from a First Amendment speech perspective, let's just say there was a story about a gay couple, but it didn't include sexually explicit things. Could it be considered great literature or appropriate to put in a high school? Possibly. I do believe there are stories that could be told about people. Do I want my children to never have interactions or experience with other people or other beliefs or other experiences in life. No,
Absolutely.
that's not what I'm asking for. It's just to say, but why can't you teach about the fact that a man and a man may want to be married without getting sexually explicit? Why does it have to go
Absolutely.
there?
Yeah.
And, just as we can teach about race and culture and all these other things without getting into inappropriate discussions, I believe we can do the same. And we don't have to push for a place where there's no mention of homosexuality in school. Because again, kids experience it. They're going to have a friend who feels that they're
Absolutely.
gay
A
or whatever.
relative, a friend, yes.
We
And
go through these
they
things.
know it's real. It's part of our reality.
Yeah. And so I'm not here saying that there's no value to learning about other sexual identities. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I believe there are very inspiring or uplifting ways to learn about it. And even just to give an example on that, I read an article from a pastor. He'd become pastor of a mega church. He was married and had some kids, but he struggled for years, and finally at some point according to him, he said, I had to admit who I was. I was gay. I was trying to live a different life. It wasn't working. And he talked about all the things he feared would happen if he came out. And he says every one of them did. I lost my job. I lost my church congregation. I lost my family. I lost all these different things. But it was really interesting to read his story because he wasn't hateful. He wasn't putting in inappropriate things. He shared his real experience. And that type of information to me was far more compelling or educational than something that included all types of anger or frustration or sexually explicit details or any of those types of things. And I feel it was really interesting to read this man's struggle through his life and to be able to say, wow, I don't know what that's like. And again, do I want to just shut out these people's experiences? No, because they're going through something, they're experiencing something that I haven't. But can we do it in an uplifting way where it's not hate-filled, it's not sexual-filled, it's not these different things? And I believe it's very possible. And again, reading this man's story, it was very interesting, and I believe insightful into the fact that we can do this. And as a society, I believe, even going back to our 13 colonies, what America was founded on, the colonies were colonies because they didn't get along. They didn't agree with each other. They were very diverse.
They were 13 different nations.
Yeah. But they came together and figured out how to create something. And I believe we can do the same with homosexuality, with race, with all these other things that we often accuse us of being divided over. But let's do it on the good that exists. And we don't need to talk about violent rapes and other things in books in school. And again, at the end of the day, if someone's 18 and they feel they need to read one of those, they're available. We're not asking for them to be banned forever.
We're not asking for them to be banned anywhere at any time. We're just asking them they're inappropriate in the schools. They're inappropriate for tax dollars to pay for. They're inappropriate in a public school where there are children. It's inappropriate for children to be exposed to it, which is, as you said so well, it's already in the law. But we have some reason we're not enforcing the law in the schools. That is the same law that should apply everywhere. It's the same standard.
Yeah, and it's one reason I believe we have so much anger and frustration over this issue in Utah right now, because it's being unequally enforced. The law's there, and so many people want to pass more laws. Oh, a gun just killed someone else, let's pass another law.
Right.
And I go, well, it's already illegal.
It's already against the law. How will having another law help? Yeah.
We have to realize there are bounds to what the law can do, and we have to step up as a people and do our part, because any liberty-based society requires a balance of law and people acting with personal responsibility to solve problems and address issues. The law just simply can't solve every problem, or else we're in a state of tyranny.
And if it did, we wouldn't have anybody violating the laws that we have, because we have laws against murder and stealing, but people still do it. So the law doesn't change the behavior. It just gives us a basis to hold people accountable for that behavior. So there are consequences to it. Austin, another issue that I think is super important to a lot of people in the state of Utah is our Utah elections, and I think national elections as well. But talk to us about what you think are some of the issues, and as AG, what could you do about some of the issues or the questions we have about election integrity?
Yeah, so I think it's again another place that's producing a lot of heat and friction in society right now. And so if we go to the foundation and say, what's the issue? Why are people so concerned? Um, I have taken quite a bit of time to look closely at the evidentiary claims that have arisen associated with elections being thrown or fraudulent or different things. And I'm not saying I'm correct in this. I'm just passing along my honest assessment.
Right.
I see concerns where there are things, there's irregularities, there's issues that look concerning, but I don't believe there's evidence yet to say what exactly caused that irregularity. Now, so to tie this back to the AG's office and the role of law and different things, people are looking at it and seeing an irregularity. And so, you can watch historical trends and suddenly those change quite a bit. Now, one of the things that often doesn't get discussed in election integrity circles where these are being discussed, they point out these irregularities. People don't discuss, at least in the ones I've been a part of, I haven't seen it discussed, the fact that there's a lot of Americans that really didn't like President Trump. And I'm not saying, I'm for or against him or anything like that. We're not talking about that. Just talking about Americans in general. Some people became to dislike him so much. And I personally know people who have never voted Democrat and suddenly were voting Democrat simply because of Trump. So when we look at irregularities and trying to identify what's going on over a broad scheme of things and over broad statistical inferences and a bunch of things, it can be hard, I believe, to connect the dots. Now, people will form beliefs about it. Again, this is part of what we talk about with the perception. If suddenly LeBron James has a rule that says he can take 5 steps and no one else does, people will believe that he paid him something or whatever. And we rarely know the reason why or the intent behind something. Those stay hidden in the human hearts most of the time. The law's job, though, is to investigate and look into something to see if it can find any evidence, any physical evidence of something. So to give an example of this in Utah, with what happened with the signature packets that Phil Lyman's been making a lot of noise about. In Utah, for certain candidates to choose to get on the ballot, they go through a different mechanism to do that. They gather signatures rather than going through convention. And at a statewide level, you're supposed to get 28,000 valid signatures, meaning from Republicans, registered voters, different things like that if you're running into the Republican Party. Governor Cox, John Curtis, and Derek Brown got signatures. They used a company. As far as I know, they were the same or similar companies they used to collect signatures for them. This company also collected signatures for a candidate named Don Ipsum. They didn't need as many because he wasn't statewide. And after the signature packets were submitted and they were verified as approved by Davis County, someone requested Don Ipsum's signatures through a GRAMA request or open public records request, and they were given to this person. And so this person then starts to look, and there's enough evidence for the person to say, whoa, it looks like there was fraudulent signatures here. I don't know if they called a few people and they said, no, I didn't sign. I'm not sure what they did. But there was enough concern and evidence produced from that individual reviewing those signatures gathered by this company that a criminal investigation was launched into that company. So at this point, Phil Lyman and his campaign said, well, we want to see the other signatures that this company gathered. Because if the company's writing fraudulent signatures for a small race where they don't need as many signatures, what are they doing for the big race where they need a lot more signatures? So again, there's now this question.
And a lot of those signatures would be the same signatures.
They could be.
The same people could have and likely would have signed both a petition for Don Ipsum and for Cox. So
Yeah,
that
because
would
again, it's
there'd be duplicate signatures, and if they were thrown out on one packet, why would those signatures not be thrown out on another one?
yes. And so then what happens is Phil Lyman's group requests it, and suddenly Lieutenant Governor, who has benefited from the signature gathering, they didn't gather signatures directly for the Lieutenant Governor, but she's only on the ballot as a result of the signature gathering,
Right.
says, no, we're not going to disclose these anymore. And that, again, do we have proof that there's any issues? No. What we have is an irregularity. We have something that's come up that's now raised a question. And people are saying, well, what's the response? And this would be like a foul, a call for a touchdown, let's say. And someone goes, well, I've got some video evidence that actually wasn't a touchdown. And the ref's going, all video evidence is banned, delete all those things. No public gets access to that video record. We're keeping it a touchdown. It may have still been a touchdown, but just the fact that they foreclose access now to it and shut it down raises intense concerns in people's minds. It appears very improper. Things start to look very wrong. And so to me, when we talk about election integrity, the only way to have election integrity is if there's truly independent source to audit things and check things out. If we have irregularities that pop up, the only way the system works of a constitutional republic where we elect leaders is for there to be some sort of check and balance, some sort of independent audit verification procedure. But if the verification procedure is simply trust us, it won't happen.
Right.
That statement of trust us makes people distrust more. It makes anger, it makes frustration. And so as they say, trust us, the anger and frustration grows.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we say, why is politics so angry? And they say, well,
exactly. Why are people
we don't have these rules being enforced fairly.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is, to give credit to lawmakers and others, not all situations are predictable. We can't predict every future scenario that comes up and just account for it and have a check and balance in place for it perfectly. And so there will be situations that arise where the law just doesn't have a good answer. And in those situations, I believe we need to be honest too and say, okay, none of us predicted that this would happen. Let's now go through and do something about it. But then our lawmakers refuse to do something about it, and others refuse to do something about it. And you go, okay, I could give you grace for not having something in place, as an accident. But when it's now continuing on and you're refusing to address it and do anything about it, now it starts to again raise questions. Well, why aren't you doing something about it? Why don't we put something in place to fix these issues now that we see them? And again, to the independent AG side of things, I believe that the AG should be actively talking about the issues and putting light on them and saying, hey, legislature, if this is true, if this was an accident, then why don't we do something? Here's some possible solutions that would take away the conflicts, that would do these different things. We can protect privacy of votes. Do I believe that an individual should be able to vote without disclosing publicly who they voted for? I do, because we have such vicious consequences. You could lose your job for voting for a certain president.
Oh, absolutely. You should definitely be able to vote for someone. It's supposed to be a secret ballot, and that's very important. But if you're going to sign a signature, if you're going to sign you're signing a public document that you want. You're saying, I want this person on the ballot. I am supporting this person. So when you sign support of someone, I don't know that should be.
But even then, I say, let's just pretend that the law says that should be private too.
Okay.
Because let's say that if you support Governor Cox, your boss says they're going to fire you if it's public or something.
Right.
So let's just pretend that should be a secret ballot as well.
Okay.
I still believe very strongly we can implement checks and balances and independent verification system where there are ways to still verify and confirm things without someone losing their job over it. So for example,
it doesn't have to be made known to the public. It still needs to have oversight and seen by a third party who can look it over, and they can keep it private, but it does need to be available to be seen. And current law does say that a representative and a candidate should have access to all those signatures.
Correct.
And I think that's where people are, their hair is on fire about it. It's because the law already says that people have access to those signatures, and yet that there are certain people. It doesn't say the public does, but it does say the legislature has access to those signatures. A candidate should have access to those signatures, and a contractor. And why that's not being upheld is, I think, why people are upset.
Yep. And I agree.
Okay.
Yep. And so these are issues that on the election side, just the bigger picture to me is I believe there are ways to balance privacy interests, but also to have independent verification, checks and balances and things in place. And I believe it's absolutely critical with where we've come to and the questions that have surfaced that we do something about it. And it's fascinating to even look back at Utah law historically. Some people say, oh, the only way to deal with things is to return to in-person voting, where every vote's counted at the ballot place and stuff. But even then, you look at Utah law on in-person voting, and in Utah law, this law has been around for a while, says if you're if you're an election official at an in-person voting location, you get ballots. So this is even before machines. This law is just talking about you have a ballot stuffed in the box type thing. And they're supposed to track how many people come in and vote. And then at the end of the day, that number of people that voted should match the number of ballots in the box. Utah law says if the number of ballots exceeds the number of people that signed in to vote that day, here's what you do about it. So they had the situation arising a long time ago that there would be more ballots in a box than people that signed up to vote that day. And what they said to do, they didn't say, oh, call the lieutenant governor, or call the attorney general, or call the police because someone's fraudulent. They said the election officials should just go through and make sure that there's a name on each one. And as long as there's a name on each one, essentially they're supposed to just reach in and randomly pull out ballots until the number of ballots equals the number of people that voted that day. And then they just count what's left. And I go, wow, that's not a great system at all to engender trust in the system, because then you just have an incentive to, slip 50 ballots in there. And if it's randomly pulling out, some of those are going to be left in, and other people that actually voted are going to be pulled out. And so we've had election integrity issues for many years. Like no election is going to be perfect. There's going to be some bump. I worked at a law firm. There's always been
human error. There always will be.
Yep.
That's expected.
And I worked at a law firm in 2010 that helped prosecute cases of voter fraud across the nation. There would be situations where entire cemeteries voted.
Right.
And so things happened, but again, I say, okay, once we realize someone gamed the system and voted with the cemetery, let's do something. We now have technology. So if someone's being registered to vote that has a death certificate in place, those two systems should ping each other and it should say, nope, you can't register this person to vote. There's a death certificate for him. We can start to close a lot of these loopholes as we find out about them. And Utah has done some. I know there was a bill run to automatically remove someone from voter rolls once their death certificate was issued. So it required that once a death certificate's issued, it kicks something over and they pull them off the voter rolls. Because before, someone could die and they'd still get a ballot mailed to them. They would just never be pulled off. So that one was cleaned up in Utah. And again, I go, okay, I don't expect people to identify every possible issue every time. It's just not possible for humans. But when we find out about it, let's do something. And if we do, I feel there's still trust to the system where we go, oh, that's crazy. Let's fix it. But it's in the situations where they refuse to fix it or refuse to do something. And then we start to go, all right, this doesn't feel right. And that creates the problems. So the AG, I believe, should enforce the law. If there is a law required, tell the government officials they should follow the law. And then also to let the people know what the law is. I have no concern with the AG. I actually believe the AG should, quote, magnify its calling and let people of Utah know, because the AG is voted for in Utah. You have some answerability to the people. You don't just become an attorney of the state and you never touch a person again. I say, no, I believe the fact they're voted for means they have a duty to help educate Utahns on what the law is and to provide for areas of weakness to say, oh, the law's not super clear here. It should be fixed. And then to kick it back to the system, let the people go through things and treat the system with respect to let the legislature legislate, let the AG enforce the law by being transparent and showing what's taking place so that people can make good decisions.
Oh, I love that, Austin. Those are some really great ideas. And I do think that we can't have too much oversight. I mean, it's hard to have too much oversight over elections. If you don't have elections, you can't have freedom. Elections are just absolutely essential that we do have fair and accurate elections. And so I do feel like there are a lot of things we can do to just shore that up and make sure that they are honest. And that would, I believe, it would bring a lot of confidence in the citizens that our elections are valid. Austin, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it. I'm hoping that I can schedule you to be on again because we're out of time, but I would like to talk about the amendment A, B, C, and D. And I think the only one that is going to be on the ballot is B going to be on the ballot. I mean, they're all going to be on the ballot, but they're not going to count A or D. And are they still
B
counting
and C? Yeah, B and C are still being
Okay, so
counted.
B and C are still going to, at this point, are still going to be on the ballot. So do you want to just really quickly, if you just want to hurry and give us like your take on B and C real fast, and then we'll be talking about those again later. But basically, B amends the Constitution to the state school fund to use those, what do you call them?
Trust land funds or
The
whatever.
trust land funds, that there would change the percentage that we would be able to have access to 1% more of the trust land funds.
Yeah, so Amendment B, it's an interesting thing. Again, going back to balance, I believe it's appropriate for the government to have some reserves for the future and to keep some money in place. But the trust land funds have grown huge. There's a lot of money we're sitting on. And we continue to tax Utahns and continue to have claims of poor, spending on education. We have a lot of money sitting in these funds. And increasing this percentage isn't going to even touch the body of the funds. It's just talking about the amount that can come from interest each year off this thing. And I say, yeah, we should really free up these funds, the interest being earned off them, to let's put more towards education. I don't think this fund needs to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. I actually have deep concerns about, is there someone making a lot of money off of managing this fund and it's just growing larger and larger, billions and billions of dollars type thing. I don't know. It's a question I have, but it's one that I would love to look into to say, is there anyone making money off this, and why do we keep so much money in it? Again, should there be some? Sure. But should it be so large that it's crazy? I don't think so. I think there needs to be a healthy balance there. And so B, I'm
very supportive of that as well. From everything that I have learned, everything I know about that, I have thought that for years, that it doesn't make sense to let that fund keep growing while we're taxing citizens. And of course, we want to fund our education system.
So I'm a fan of B.
Yes.
We have the money. Let's use it.
Yes.
And not resort to tax increases.
We need it. And it's not going to hurt us in the future, which I think is really important too. It's not like just get it now. Okay, Constitutional Amendment C. This one surprised me because I thought it was already in our Constitution, but it is not.
Yeah, so Amendment C says that the office of county sheriff should be elected and be a 4-year position. And so naturally, I asked the question of, well, what counties aren't doing this? Because we usually pass laws for a reason. And I went and looked, and all the counties in Utah are currently electing their sheriff. And so digging into it a little bit deeper, the stated reason for it is that the sponsor behind it wanted to make sure that people couldn't lose that right. Because right now, there's been talk of consolidating things like the AG's office. Cox has wanted to appoint the AG.
Right.
And if people could appoint the sheriff, you again start to lose the independence of this referee to an extent that's enforcing the rules and laws. And in a system where the top law enforcer is appointed, there's very little chance they're going to arrest the person that appointed them for something. And so there's that conflict. And so And so the claim was the amendment was produced to say it's already the way it is, so no one's going to have any heartburn with it, but let's make it constitutional so that a governor or a county council or something can't strip that right and just take it away. Because right now they could just change the law and say we're going to appoint the sheriff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm a fan of C to say, yeah, let's bake in some constitutional protections so that those can't just be stripped away and start appointing people. So the people can decide, and that person can be answerable to the people more than answerable to a person that appoints them.
Absolutely. And I think I agree with you. I think that is an excellent, I didn't know that it wasn't in the Constitution, and I was aware that every county was doing that. So I thought that it was already in our Constitution and our law, but I do like that someone was proactive and like, let's get this in our Constitution so it can't just be changed.
Yeah.
And I'm looking, but I don't see who the sponsor of that is. But
the sponsor was, to my knowledge, Brad Wilson.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah,
Wow.
it's a surprise for people. But yeah.
It's a shocker. It's more than a surprise. It's a shocker. So, well, there's a surprise every day. So that's amazing. So, yeah, you really threw me off there, Austin. Take myself up off the floor on that one. So, well, Austin, thank you so much. And I would like to have you back to discuss Amendment A and D, which will probably be on your ballot, but it won't matter. And they probably won't even tally it up. There's a good possibility of that, but it will be back. Both of those issues will be back, and they're both very important issues in my opinion. So I would love to have you back to discuss those things. And I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for your excellent points that you brought up. I would like everyone to be aware you are running for the Utah AG. How does anyone get in touch with you if they want to ask you more questions or if they want to help you with your campaign?
Yeah. So, and again, thanks for having me on and having these discussions.
My
They're super
pleasure.
important. But just to counter something you said, I actually disagree a little bit that your vote on Amendment A and D won't matter. I believe very strongly they'll tally it up
That you
for
think
their
they
own
will tally
where
it?
I actually do think they will for statistical purposes to see where they're at. So if you want Amendment A or D or don't want them, your vote, I believe, will tell them where people are sitting, and it will influence what they're going to do in 2 years when they try and put this back on. So
I do feel it's important to vote, but I didn't know that they would actually count it. But I think, yeah, we should, because they might. You're absolutely right, Austin. I agree with you.
Whether they do or not, I don't know. But why wouldn't you? You have all this data sitting there to tell you how it would have gone.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you look at it? It'd be kind of crazy not to. So anyways, but for people to get a hold of me, my website is austinhepworth.com. And I have, my email address. I use my law firm's email, and that's at believe.legal. So my email is ahepworth@believe.legal. But you can get to that site through austinhepworth.com. So try and make it easy. austinhepworth.com has all the links you need. It has a contact form. And I'm happy to talk to anyone, answer questions, go through those things. Obviously, it's a little bit crazy busy right now. So if I don't get back to you immediately, don't be upset. Sometimes I'm a couple days behind on text or phone calls, but I will certainly try and talk to you, and I'm happy to do that.
Thank you so much, Austin. Thanks for being here. And I'm so thrilled that you're running, because I think you will be an absolutely phenomenal AG. And I'm grateful to have a candidate that I can vote for with a clear conscience. And I just have so much integrity and so much intelligence and experience. And I'm really grateful that you're running. And thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good one. Okay, we are now going to welcome in a Liberty Mom, Mary Ann Christensen. And Mary Ann is absolutely a great Liberty Mom. And I want to say you have 5 children, Mary Ann, am I right?
I do. 5 children.
I don't want to leave anybody out. And Mary Ann, she was with Utah Eagle Forum for many decades. And she has become the president of the chair. I don't know. Are you going by president or chair?
Executive director.
Executive director of Utah Legislative Watch, which is an excellent organization. And I am very happy that she has taken that up, because These are issues that impact Utah and Utahns that are very important. And so it is exciting. And it's always nice to have another organization with a focus on specific issues that we can work together, but actually know that someone is kind of leading the charge and taking that up. And you have been on the forefront of those issues, especially with tax reformation and really all of the issues that face Utah. And so welcome, Marianne. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. And I think it's important for people to know that Utah Legislative Watch was the brainchild of Dalane, England. So
it is not, but thank you very much. It was both of ours. We did it together and it's been fun. And it's a great organization and I love it. And I am still a member and I feel really excited about it. And I would like everyone to know about it because it is really important because, you know, what you're doing is serving every single person in the state. Has actually, you're creating value that everyone has benefited from. So thank you very much. Now there's a lot of issues that we can talk about and I am so sorry that our time is short and I'm hoping that you can come on next week because I'd really like to have more time to discuss some of these amazing important issues. And based on the fact, yes, go ahead.
I've been listening to the conversation with Austin and I respect him so much. I'm so glad that we have a great AG candidate in him. But as I was listening, there were a few things that I wanted to push back on if I could.
Okay. Yes, of course. Go right ahead.
Not on anymore. But first of all, the constitutional, hopefully elected sheriffs we can train them how to be constitutional sheriffs. And that's not going to happen if they're not elected by the people. And he said, yeah, we're electing them. But the trend these days is to consolidate police forces.
Which is what he did address that. He did mention that.
Right.
That they want to. There's pushback for that.
Well, we've already had unified police,
yes.
unified fire. Those are combinations of different cities all coming together. I prefer local representation, and then of course they're going to work with each other across jurisdictions, of course, but especially policing, it needs to be closest to the people. And so this is our guarantee of that. So super glad about that one. On the school trust lands, Amendment B.
Yes.
What's important, and you guys did a great job of talking about that, but there are really three parts to those funds. There is the principal that's been in the fund forever. Mm-hmm. There are amounts that are added to the principal each year as the state makes revenue off of school trust lands. That becomes part of the principal. So this increasing from 4% to 5% is just 5% of the interest we're earning off of it. So in my book, I would love to see them continue to take the revenue from the trust lands and add it to the principal and let the principal get larger that way. And then I would rather let the legislature spend 100% of the interest each year.
Yeah. Because
we could largely get rid of other tax streams that are funding education if we did that.
I totally agree with you. And I don't know how heavy of a lift that would be in a constitutional amendment, but I so agree with you because this is really so minor. I agree with that 100%, but I wish it was much more. Yeah. And I don't know really what happened, why they didn't at least try for more, but maybe they're testing the waters, get this through, and then maybe we can see where we can go from there. But it does make sense to me to have it much greater. So what would not hurt anything.
4% to 5%, the education establishment freaks out even at that.
They do. Yeah.
People understand what a minute amount of the total that it is.
It is. Yeah.
I'm sure they just wanted an easy pass. They're looking at how much they really would love to have, and they just increased it by enough to get that much without lowering our taxes in other places.
Right.
But if we went much higher than that on the amount of just interest, we're just talking about annual interest. If
we're not touching the principal at all, we're just talking about the interest.
If we allowed them to spend the annual interest, then they could lower taxes in a very substantive way for all of Utahns. But the voters don't understand that. They don't understand the issue, and they don't understand the actual 3 different parts of the fund. And so, yeah, I think it's good for them to go to that low-hanging fruit for now and get it done so that they have the funds they need in the near future. But yeah, we need to revisit it again with a whole lot of education for the people.
We do. We
So
do.
everyone that. Going back to the exposure of children to LGBT,
Yes. Right.
start
Okay.
lower grades, lower elementary.
Yeah.
I have a friend who she started working with Murray moms because in little old Murray district, her 3rd grade son came home and when she said, "What did you learn in school today?" We learned that girls can become boys. We learned that doctors can give girls medicine to turn them into boys.
Yeah.
In 3rd grade.
It's freaking horrifying. It's horrifying.
So, he was saying it's important that we let our children be exposed to things that are going to be in their world going forward. But
knowing Austin, I don't think he meant that young. Because he didn't say they need to be as much as he, in his defense, because he's not here. But right. I think he's just saying, I'm not saying we have to omit every book about every person that's gay or that's, but it needs to be in a context that it's in context of the story or what you can learn, not about the sexuality, which would be completely different what you're saying. There's no way any child should be told a lie that you can change your sex, that you can take any kind of, a doctor can give somebody something to change your sex, because it's not true. It's not true. And no child at any age should be exposed to that, nor should any adult, frankly.
But he identified the problem we have now. Even in lower grades, our children are going to see other children whose parents have said, "Oh, my little daughter, you feel like a boy? Well, I'm going to treat you like a boy now." Mm-hmm. And those kids come to school and they create this conundrum.
They do. And then kids are exposed to it because this happens in elementary school, often because there are kids that are going to school that they're a boy one day and then the next day they come back in a dress and want a different name. And then the next week they might be back to dressing like a boy. And it is a very serious problem because it is changing our culture and our society.
And we live in a society where it's very virtuous to follow people down their paths to fantasy, completely divorcing them from reality. In my generation, if I had told my parents, "You know what, I think I'm a boy," they'd say, "Yeah, but you're not."
Right. So we would just tell you the truth. Really, honey? I wonder what's causing that, because you're not a boy, and nothing you can do to turn you into a boy. Are you just liking boy sports? What makes you feel that way? And they would help us address the actual issue, the actual cause of the problem, rather than pretending like our mental illness is healthy.
But now our teachers are confronted with this, and they cannot make any child in their class feel ostracized. But by accepting the fantasy in front of all the other kids, what happens in these young grades is that we have planted an idea, a strange question. What? That can happen. And then they grow up with that question in their minds. And that is the seed that has caused the social contagion that is associated with LGBT.
Totally true.
Who never would have, gotten to a certain age and said, "Yeah, Mom, I really am this other sex." They never would have gotten to that point ever if the seed hadn't been planted earlier on in their life. So
that's totally true. And how do we stop that from happening, Marianne? Do you see a solution? How do you stop the seed from being planted in the world that we live? Because we can't come from where we wish we were. We have to act based on where we actually are.
I think it would be great for the schools to be the purveyors of reality for all children.
Mm-hmm.
And parents' problem with children that are living a fantasy and not reality, that we help the parents get counseling for their child. which means that we have to rewrite the rules that the medical association put into place that just said, if you take a kid and tell this girl that they're not really a boy, you'll lose your medical license. That's where we are in Utah right now.
That's where we are, which is insanity.
Parents have no place to go to get this treatment that they need for their children. And it has disastrous effects on children. Disastrous.
All of the children, not just the children suffering from the mental illness. It's actually causing social contagion and causing a mental illness with other kids. And as you know, when we're up at the legislature, they're constantly trying to figure out solutions, wanting to pass laws, starting programs to help with these problems, when the solution is right in front of us. Is stop causing the problem, and that is the best solution. Stop creating the problem.
Where we are also is that the schools would rather support children in their fantasies without telling parents that they're doing it than to just say, we're a school of reality. And if your child can't fit in here, then let's help you get treatment so that they can accept their reality.
Well,
and
go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
It's a very, very complex problem, and we're dealing with little souls.
Real life people with real life problems. But what we do know is that 98% of boys, if you just don't continue to push it on them, if you just let them develop and grow up and you're not causing the social contagion, if you don't reinforce it, they will grow out of it. And 88% of girls will grow out of it naturally. They won't even need counseling. They won't even need help. You just kids get confused. It's a crazy world. Our bodies go through difficult times. But we can love them through that. And these kids that are in the schools, I am all over loving them and giving them, caring about them, and not saying, well, you need to go to another school, but totally caring about them. And because what they need is acceptance and love, but they need acceptance of the truth and love for the truth, not embracing a lie. Marianne, I'm hoping that you can be on next week. Thank you so much for joining us. Our time is up. Thank you so much for bringing up those excellent points. And I do feel like we've got to discuss Amendment A and Amendment D. Those are two of the most important ones, in my opinion. And
vote. People need to vote, because
and definitely vote. Yeah.
Be appealed before the election actually happens. Now, here's the big problem. With early voting, with mailing out ballots, people will get their ballots and they'll mark them and they'll send them back in. And then what happens if afterward they go to a higher court and get the higher court to rule, no, appropriate, go ahead and count them. And people failed to vote on them because they were told by all the news that don't vote on them, they won't be counted. So people don't vote on them. And then what if a higher court reverses the court decisions that are active right now?
Don't vote till next week when we can discuss Amendment A, B, C, and D, but specifically Amendment A and D. Wait till that to vote so that you're making an educated. I'm so sorry we have to go. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a beautiful day. And remember, you are the guardian.